Hello and welcome to another episode of Reading Together from Sea Harp Press. I'm Eugene Luning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and I'm delighted as always to be continuing our journey through C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. In our last episode, we were on letter 27. Today we'll be in letter 28. My dear Wormwood, when I told you not to fill your letters with rubbish about the war, I meant, of course, that I did not want to have your rather infantile rhapsodies about the death of men and the destruction of cities. Insofar as the war really concerns the spiritual state of the patient, I naturally want full reports. And on this aspect, you seem singularly obtuse. Thus you tell me with glee that there is a reason to expect heavy air raids on the town where the creature lives. This is a crying example of something I have complained about already, your readiness to forget the main point in your immediate enjoyment of human suffering. Do you not know that bombs kill men? Or do you not realize that the patient's death at this moment is precisely what we want to avoid? He has escaped the worldly friends with whom you tried to entangle him. He has fallen in love with a very Christian woman and is temporarily immune from your attacks on his chastity. And the various methods of corrupting his spiritual life, which we have been trying, are so far unsuccessful. At the present moment, as the full impact of the war draws nearer and his worldly hopes take a proportionately lower place in his mind, full of his defense work, full of the girl, forced to attend to his neighbors more than he has ever done before, and liking it more than he expected, taken out of himself, as the humans say, and daily increasing in conscious dependence on the enemy, meaning God, he will almost certainly be lost to us if he is killed tonight. This is so obvious that I am ashamed to write it. I sometimes wonder if you young fiends are not kept out on temptation duty too long at a time. If you are not in some danger of becoming infected by the sentiments and values of the humans among whom you work. They, of course, do tend to regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. But that is because we have taught them to do so. Do not let us be infected by our own propaganda. I know it seems strange that your chief aim at the moment should be the very same thing for which the patient's lover and his mother are praying, namely, his bodily safety. But so it is. You should be guarding him like the apple of your eye. If he dies now, you lose him. If he survives the war, there is always hope. Now I'm going to pause there because that was all one paragraph and it continues. But I want to reflect for a moment upon, again, some of C.S. Lewis's personal backstory, as well as the experience that was being lived through as this was being written. Just to remind you, Lewis himself went to the trenches, the Western Front, as we might call it, in World War I. So when he's having Screwtape sort of joking about Wormwood being out on temptation duty too long, it's almost like he's remembering himself, Lewis, the experience of being sent out on perhaps a night patrol. Those horrible experiences that those in the trenches experienced when they would actually go out of the trench by night and into that no man's land, or even further out onto these like far out, near the opposite trenches to see where the barbed wire was, to prepare sapping for like the next attack, whatever it might have been. Anyone who lived through what they called the Great War was permanently marked by it. They didn't have a thing at the time called PTSD. They would have called it shell shock. But Lewis, despite the fact that we sense him to be very balanced, to have this sort of peace of mind, was no doubt always reflecting back, always interpreting his life through the experience he'd had in the trenches. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we are actually hearing these words that are being written during the Blitz, during, let's say, the Coventry bombings, during a time in England that was absolutely terrifying. So as Screwtape is talking about Wormwood and Wormwood being excited about the danger to life and limb of his patient, I want to remind you that these were fraught, scary, not just times, but minutes, hours. These were days when men and women and children in London for certain, but throughout southern England, were actually afraid, often, like physically afraid. In our modern day, in this country where I'm recording this, we very rarely are physically afraid in the way that they were feeling day by day by day. So I just want to remind you of that. That's the context both for Lewis from the Great War and for the people who would have originally been reading this and for the patient. Now let me continue that very long paragraph. The enemy, God, has guarded him from you through the first great wave of temptations. But if only he can be kept alive, you have time itself for your ally. The long, dull, monotonous years of middle-aged prosperity or middle-aged adversity are excellent campaigning weather. You see, it is so hard for these creatures to persevere. The routine of adversity, the gradual decay of youthful loves and youthful hopes, the quiet despair, hardly felt as pain of ever overcoming the chronic temptations with which we have again and again defeated them, the drabness which we create in their lives, and the inarticulate resentment with which we teach them to respond to it. All this provides admirable opportunities of wearing out a soul by attrition. If, on the other hand, the middle years prove prosperous, our position is even stronger. Prosperity knits a man to the world. He feels that he is finding his place in it, while really it is finding its place in him. His increasing reputation, his widening circle of acquaintances, his sense of importance, the growing pressure of absorbing and agreeable work build up in him a sense of being really at home in earth, which is just what we want. You will notice that the young are generally less unwilling to die than the middle-aged and the old. What a powerful ending of that first very long paragraph. I'm going to go back through just for a second, because if you notice, there was two parts of that sort of middle-aged doldrums that Screwtape is talking about. He talks about adversity and prosperity. And he says that both are equally liable to get this patient off track. So let's go back to adversity for a second. The way he describes it as the routine, the decay of love and hope, despair, drabness, inarticulate resentment, the way that sort of middle age, which by the way I can speak to all of this, the way that all of those accrue to make adversity and just sort of the blah of life really overcome the spiritual life. Then the idea that prosperity, boy, that's even a better spiritual attack. Let's look at some of that. Increasing reputation, widening acquaintances, self-importance, pressure of work, these build up in him, and that makes it feel like his home is upon the earth. Right in the middle of that paragraph, it used a word, yet again, a warfare word, attrition. If you know anything about more the old-fashioned forms of warfare, siege warfare, we don't see as much of that anymore. But when that was the way that war was done, let's say, I referenced him a couple of chapters ago, Henry V, when he arrives in northern France and lays siege to the first fortification he comes to, well, they surround, and then they begin to try to take. They throw projectiles, flaming projectiles at this castle until eventually the French lord of that fortification gives up. That's attrition. You're running out of food, you're running out of clean water, everything is filthy and people are starting to starve. Well, time to give up. Friends, that is a perfect word for sometimes the way that life can feel. You and I have a million concerns, little anxieties, or on the prosperity side, things are going really well to the point that you can take your eyes off of the Lord and put them back on yourself. Well, here I am, your old friend Eugene, to speak to the antidote for both of these. It is the power of today. It's the power of the fact that the only place you and I can follow Jesus is today. When you woke up this morning, you had the opportunity to encounter him, to talk with him, to pray, to read his word, to be reminded again that he's alive, that your prayers are not directed at some nebulous unknown God, but at Jesus, the Savior of the world who is your Savior. Well, then you began your day. You went into either, who knows, school or work, or just a series of errands you needed to run. Or who knows, maybe you're watching this on vacation, but you had things to do, places to be. Do you remember that as you go to those places, you carry, let's call it the eternal flame of the kingdom? There are actual, actionable things for you to do today for the sake of Jesus. It elevates meeting that barista at the Starbucks. It elevates going into that meeting. It elevates pick up and drop off at your kid's school. Everywhere you go, you bear with you the way. Friends, you do not have to let life and temptation and either adversity or prosperity lay siege to your spiritual life. You can be on the offensive by being with Jesus. The more alive he is to you, the more alive you will be. And all of a sudden, whether you're in your 40s like me, or 20 or 85, each and every day becomes this inestimable treasure, excitement, adventure, even in the midst of hardship, even in the midst of triumph that is trying to take your eye off of him. So friends, today is the secret. I'll keep reading. The truth is that the enemy, God, having oddly destined these mere animals to life in his own eternal world, has guarded them pretty effectively from the danger of feeling at home anywhere else. That is why we must often wish long life to our patients. 70 years is not a day too much for the difficult task of unraveling their souls from heaven and building up a firm attachment to the earth. While they are young, we find them always shooting off at a tangent. Even if we contrive to keep them ignorant of explicit religion, the incalculable winds of fantasy and music and poetry, the mere face of a girl, the song of a bird, or the sight of a horizon are always blowing our whole structure away. They will not apply themselves steadily to worldly advancement, prudent connections, and the policy of safety first. So inveterate is their appetite for heaven that our best method at this stage of attaching them to earth is to make them believe that earth can be turned into heaven at some future date by politics or eugenics or science or psychology or whatnot. Real worldliness is a work of time, assisted, of course, by pride, for we teach them to describe the creeping death as good sense or maturity or experience. Experience, in the peculiar sense we teach them to give it, is, by the by, a most useful word. A great human philosopher nearly let our secret out when he said that where virtue is concerned, experience is the mother of illusion. But thanks to a change in fashion, and also, of course, to the historical point of view, we have largely rendered his book innocuous. I cannot tell you off the top of my head, though I was thinking as I was reading it, I wonder which philosopher said that. I can't tell you, but I will tell you another of my favorite philosophers. I think I referenced him briefly in the last chapter, Henry David Thoreau. He has a great line in Walden where he says, "We now no longer camp as for a night, but we have settled down on earth and forgotten heaven." That's what Lewis is saying too. Whether in youth, where we're constantly flying off in all these exciting tangential ways, or in middle age, where we settle down and kind of hunker down in our normalcy and way of life, whatever causes us to lose the heavenly mindset, to raise our eyes and remember the one who is on the throne, any of that plays to the enemy's advantage. And I'm not talking the enemy that Screwtape's talking about. I'm talking about the evil one. So friends, you and I, we need to have a pilgrim mindset. We do not want to camp like it's a long-term thing where we hunker down, settle down, and we keep our entire eyes upon this limited horizon. We want to camp as for a night, like Thoreau said. We do not want to just settle down on earth and forget heaven. We want to be so mindful of heaven that we actually give a heavenly tinge to all we do upon the earth. Friends, your, again, day to day is the place to make a conversion, not only in your own heart, but of the atmosphere around yourself. To show people in your office, in your kids' school, in the grocery store as you pop in to grab something. Everywhere we go, we show the world Jesus today. Last paragraph. How valuable time is to us may be gauged by the fact that the enemy, God, allows us so little of it. The majority of the human race dies in infancy. Of the survivors, a good many die in youth. It is obvious that to him, human birth is important chiefly as the qualification for human death, and death solely as the gate to that other kind of life. We are allowed to work only on a selected minority of the race, for what humans call a normal life is the exception. Apparently, he wants some, but only a very few, of the human animals with which he is peopling heaven to have had the experience of resisting us through an earthly life of 60 or 70 years. Well, there is our opportunity. The smaller it is, the better we must use it. Whatever you do, keep your patient as safe as you possibly can. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. There's one little clause in there that caught my heart and my eye. That other kind of life. I myself have lost both my parents already, at a fairly young age to have lost both. But often I think of them, and I'm so delighted to think that they are experiencing, even now, in this sort of time-space sense of reality, right now, my parents are experiencing that other kind of life. It's the higher kind. It's the kind that you and I in Jesus are all destined to live in forever. So whether life is difficult right now for you, or it feels almost too easy, I would remind you, yes, it is limited. These days that we take for granted will eventually run out. There will come a time when you and I will take our last breath. Who knows? Maybe someday you're watching this video and I'm gone. Well, it's no matter to me, because I, and someday you, will be experiencing the other kind of life. The life just on the other side of closing our eyes for the last time and opening them with him, with Jesus. So friends, today, as finite beings, let's live it all the way up for the kingdom. Let's truly love those around us. Let's be filled with the joy and delight of this glorious kingdom that we are inheriting day by day. Thanks for joining me for another fascinating letter in the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. I'm so thankful for this journey I get to take with all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of this God-given day.